The silence was the thing that paid the bills. The deep, endless quiet of the belt of hulks where dead ships came to be picked clean. My world was a bubble of recycled air and the low hum of life support inside my salvage runner, the Magpie, a ship that was itself a Frankenstein's monster of a dozen other dead vessels. For 10 years, this had been my universe, the slow dance of maneuvering thrusters, the hiss of a plasma torch cutting through a derelict's hull, and the ghostly echoes in ships that once carried thousands of souls across the void. I was a scrapper, a vulture in a vacuum, and I was good at it because I understood the dead. They didn't talk back, didn't make promises, didn't leave. They just floated and waited, their secrets locked in cold metal. My only link to the living, breathing world was a flickering comm screen and the face that appeared on it every cycle at 1900 hours sharp. Her name was Maya. She had my late wife's eyes and a smile that could outshine a nebula. My daughter. She was studying xenolinguistics at the Triton Academy, a world away in every sense. Her calls were the only time the silence in my life felt wrong. A void that needed to be filled with her laughter and her wild theories about the syntax of crystalline entities in the Oort cloud. She was my gravity, the single point around which my lonely orbit was fixed, the Galactic Concordate, the bloated, self-important bureaucracy that claimed to govern the settled systems. Had a saying, order is the absence of variables. They loved their sterile corridors on Alpha Centauri Prime, their clean data, and their predictable trade routes. They saw people like me as a necessary but untidy variable, the janitors of their grand cosmic experiment. The Concordate had recently opened a new hyperspace lane, the Seraphim route, which cut travel time between the core worlds and the outer rim by nearly a third. They hailed it as a marvel of engineering and a testament to galactic peace, a perfectly safe corridor shielded from pirates and stellar phenomena. It was on that route, aboard the Concordate's flagship luxury liner, the Celestial Equinox, that Maya was traveling. She'd won a scholarship for a semester-long immersion program, a chance to study ancient alien ruins on a newly discovered world. She was ecstatic. I was terrified. I'd spent my life seeing how easily the universe could break things, how the finest ships with the proudest names could be turned into floating tombs by a single miscalculation or a stray piece of rock. I offered to pay for a chartered flight, a slower, less glamorous route that I trusted more, but she just laughed. Dad, it's the safest ship in the fleet. It's the Concordate's pride and joy. Nothing's going to happen. The news came 3 days later. It wasn't a frantic distress call or a dramatic news report. It was a formal Concordate communique, delivered with the cold efficiency of a corporate layoff. The Celestial Equinox, with all 3,412 souls aboard, was lost. The official explanation was a catastrophic cascade failure of the novel gravimetric drive while navigating an unforeseen spatial anomaly. It was a word salad of technical jargon designed to sound authoritative and, above all, final. No survivors, no wreckage. The ship, they claimed, had likely been atomized or thrown into an alternate dimension. They offered their deepest sympathies and a standardized compensation package. My world didn't explode. It just switched off. The silence I had once found comfort in became a crushing weight. The hum of my ship was a funeral dirge. I watched the Concordate's spokesman on the Galactic net, a man with a plastic face and eyes that had never seen real grief, talk about the tragic, unavoidable nature of space travel and the bravery of the pioneers aboard the Equinox. Pioneers. They were families on vacation, students, diplomats, artists. Maya was going to study ruins, not become one. For weeks. I drifted, both literally and figuratively. I didn't work. I barely ate. I just floated in the boneyard, surrounded by the dead, feeling like one of them. The official report was released a month later, a 1,000-page document filled with simulations and theoretical physics that all concluded the same thing. It was a 1 in a billion accident. Case closed. But something gnawed at me. A tiny, jagged piece of doubt lodged deep in my gut. I knew ships. I had crawled through the guts of vessels that had been torn apart by every conceivable disaster. Ships don't just vanish. They leave ghosts. A trail of debris. A distorted energy signature. A final, garbled transmission. The Concordat was claiming there was nothing. A perfect erasure. That wasn't how physics worked. The first crack in the official story came from an old contact, a data haunter named Kale, who lived in the digital shadows of the Galactic network. He owed me a favor after I'd salvaged the only existing copy of his wife's neural imprint from a wrecked data hauler. His message was short and encrypted. They're lying. The Seraphim route is too clean. Sentinels are scrubbing all deep space telemetry in that sector. Not archiving. Scrubbing. That's not protocol for an accident. Concordat Sentinels were the secret police of the information age. Silent agents who ensured the official narrative remained the only narrative. Their involvement meant that this wasn't just an accident being covered up. It was a secret being buried. That night, I powered up the Magpie's deep core systems for the first time in a month. The grief was still there. A cold, heavy stone in my chest. But now it had a companion rage. A slow burning, dark ember rage. I started digging. I used every back channel I knew, called in every favor I was owed from a decade of trading in secrets and salvage tech. I was looking for a ghost, a single scrap of data that the Sentinels had missed. I mortgaged my salvage license, sold off my reserve of rare alloys, and poured every credit I had into the search, buying slivers of encrypted data from rogue comms satellites and paying off disgruntled low-level Concordat technicians. I was chasing a phantom, and everyone told me I was crazy, that I was a grieving father who couldn't accept the truth. But the truth they were selling felt like a lie, and I would rather be a madman chasing a phantom than a sane man accepting a lie that absolved the universe of my daughter's murder, because that's what it started to feel like. Not an accident. A murder. The breakthrough came from a pirate listening post on the edge of Concordat space. For an exorbitant price, they sold me a raw data packet, less than a gigabyte in size, captured by a long-range sensor array moments before the Equinox vanished. It was junk data to them, an unreadable burst of energy that had fried one of their sensors. To me, it was everything. It took me 2 weeks of non-stop work to decrypt and reconstruct the file. My tiny HAB module smelling of stale coffee and ozone from the overworked processors. When I finally broke the encryption, I didn't find sensor readings. I found a voice. It was a fragment of the Equinox's bridge recording, just the last 90 seconds. The first voice was calm, professional. It belonged to the ship's first officer, a woman named Jin. Commander, getting a strange resonance on the long-range scanners. Not a ship, not a stellar body. It's harmonic. Another voice, the commander's, replied, "Frequency, that's the thing." "Sir," Jin said, a note of confusion in her voice, "there is no frequency. It's like a wave of pure silence propagating through space. It's absorbing ambient radiation. There was a pause, a low hum of the bridge. Shields to full. Yellow alert. Hail on all channels. Let's find out who's playing tricks. The next sound was a faint, almost imperceptible chime, like a single grain of sand striking a vast crystal bell. It grew in pitch and intensity with terrifying speed, climbing past the spectrum of human hearing into something that felt like it was going to tear the air apart. Then, the recording was filled with a sudden, sharp intake of breath from the commander, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. "My God," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's not a wave. It's unmaking things." That was the last word. The recording didn't end with an explosion, or the shriek of tearing metal, or even static. It just stopped. The file ended. One moment, the bridge of the most advanced ship in the galaxy was there, and the next, there was only absolute, total, and perfect nothing. The data logs confirmed it. The ship's integrity didn't fail. It ceased to register. Matter, energy, space-time, it all just ended. This wasn't an accident. This was a weapon that didn't destroy, but erased. I sat back in my chair, the silence of my ship now a screaming testament to the lie I'd been told. My daughter hadn't died in a tragic accident. She had been unmade, wiped from existence as a footnote in a field test for a weapon of unimaginable horror. The Concordat hadn't just covered up a malfunction, they had sanctioned an execution and then erased the evidence, burying 3-4-12 souls under a mountain of bureaucratic lies. I looked at the hollow frame on my console, the one of Maya laughing, her head thrown back. On her last trip home, they had erased her life, her future, her very existence from the universe. But they had forgotten one variable. They had forgotten her father. My rage was no longer a slow burn. It was a white-hot star. I would not bring the Concordat to justice. The Concordat was a system, and systems were faceless. No. I would find the people who built this weapon, the people who gave the order, the people who fired it. I would find them, and I would teach them the true meaning of a variable. I would be the unforeseen anomaly in their clean, ordered galaxy. They wanted to unmake things. I would show them how it was done. My life as a scrapper was over. A new, much darker work was about to begin. The universe owed me a debt, and I intended to collect. The 90 seconds of audio from the Equinox's bridge was the only currency I had. A ghost's whisper that I played on a loop until the words lost their meaning and became a mantra of my rage. It's unmaking things. I was a man who understood how things were made and unmade, how a ship's spine could be snapped by a micrometeoroid, or its heart could be silenced by a cascade failure in the reactor core. But this was different. This was a violation of the fundamental laws of existence, a technology so profane it bordered on cosmic blasphemy, and the Concordat had painted it over with the bland, beige color of an industrial accident. To find the artists of this atrocity, I needed a guide into the underworld of classified science, a place where secrets were buried deeper than any shipwreck. My old contacts in the salvage and smuggling trades were useless here. They dealt in cargo manifests and patrol schedules, not in the theoretical physics of annihilation. I needed someone who curated the secrets the Concordat thought were perfectly secure. I needed the archivist. Finding the archivist was like trying to nail a shadow to a wall. There was no address, no comm frequency. There was only a protocol, a series of seemingly random actions performed in a precise sequence. I sold a perfectly good plasma cutter for scrap on Titan, bought a specific strain of genetically modified lichen from a back-alley botanist on Ganymede, and then broadcasted a line of pre-war poetry on a dead frequency used by a long-extinct religious cult. It felt like madness, a scavenger hunt designed by a paranoid lunatic. But 2 days later, a message appeared on my private terminal. It was a single, non-blinking symbol, a stylized Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail. Beneath it, a line of text. The price of knowledge is a piece of the past. There is a ghost in quarantine. Fetch it for me. A set of coordinates followed, pointing to a dead zone known as the Epsilon Drift, a region of space littered with the failed experiments and forgotten outposts of humanity's first stumbling expansion into the solar system. The target was Quarantine Station Epsilon, a medical research facility that had been scuttled and abandoned 2 centuries ago after a viral outbreak that, according to the official histories, had been successfully contained. The archivist wanted an object from its deepest laboratory, the central data core of the original research project, codenamed Morpheus. The station was in a decaying orbit around a brown dwarf, its systems dead except for the automated defenses, powered by a slowly dying radioisotope generator. A perfect tomb, a perfect test. This was the archivist's price, and I knew it was more than just a retrieval mission. It was an audition. My first act was to transform the Magpie. My ship was a scavenger, built for endurance and heavy lifting, not for stealth or combat. That had to change. I flew to a black market shipyard hidden in the hollowed-out asteroid of a failed mining colony, a place where ships went to get new identities and teeth. I sold the last of my salvageable high-grade metals and Maya's untouched education fund, a transaction that felt like tearing out a piece of my own heart, and I invested it all in the conversion. We ripped out the oversized cargo bay and replaced it with a military-grade sensor dampener and a heatsink system scavenged from a defunct Concordate spy drone. We bolted on a pair of kinetic cannons, old but reliable, hiding them behind retractable plating so the Magpie still looked like a harmless hauler. The ship's gentle hum was replaced by the low, guttural growl of a predator. The Magpie was no longer a home, it was a weapon. And as I worked, my grief began to cool and harden into something sharper, something with the cold, clean edge of a knife. The journey to the Epsilon Drift was a journey inward. The further I flew from the charted lanes, the more the man I used to be, the father, the husband, the quiet man who found solace in silence, flaked away like rust. I stopped looking at Maya's picture. I couldn't bear the hope in her eyes, the life that I had failed to protect. Instead, I studied the schematics of Station Epsilon, memorized its decay rates, its structural weaknesses, the blind spots in its centuries-old defense grid. Her memory wasn't a comfort anymore, it was fuel. Quarantine Station Epsilon was a skeletal horror, a lattice of rusted metal and broken modules spinning slowly in the dim, red light of the brown dwarf. It looked like the carcass of some great beast, picked clean by time. My approach was a crawl, the Magpie running cold and silent, a ghost slipping through a graveyard. I docked at a ruptured maintenance airlock, a wound in the station's side that the automated systems had long since forgotten. The inside was worse than the outside. The air, though breathable thanks to my suit's filters, was thick with the smell of decay and antiseptic. A sterile rot. Every surface was coated in a fine layer of reddish dust, the incinerated remains of the station's final, desperate decontamination cycle. My boots made no sound on the grated floors. I moved through corridors where the ghosts of panicked scientists and dying patients seemed to linger in the oppressive silence. The automated defenses were the real threat. Laser grids that would flicker to life without warning. Security drones that would activate at the slightest vibration. Their programming degraded to a simple, mindless command: sterilize all unauthorized life. I wasn't a soldier, but I was a scrapper. I knew how to read the language of dying systems. I saw the telltale flicker of a capacitor about to charge a laser emitter, the subtle sag in a floor plate that hit a pressure sensor. I bypassed them, disarmed them, or simply waited them out. A patient phantom in a house of traps. The central lab was 3 decks down, sealed behind a meter-thick blast door. There was no power to the controls, but I had my plasma torch. I didn't cut the lock. That would take too long and draw too much power. Instead, I cut a hole through the weaker hydraulic mechanism that held the door in place. My scrapper's mind seeing the skeleton beneath the skin of the machine. The door groaned in protest and then sagged open just enough for me to squeeze through. The Morpheus lab was pristine, a bubble of the past preserved in a vacuum. The dust hadn't settled here. A single emergency light cast long, distorted shadows across terminals and specimen tanks. In the center of the room, cradled in a containment field that was still drawing the last dregs of power from the station's dying heart, was the core. It wasn't a server rack or a block of silicon. It was a sphere of what looked like polished obsidian, featureless and perfectly smooth, that seemed to drink the light around it. As I approached, I felt a strange pressure in my mind, a faint, melodic whisper that had no source. I disabled the containment field. The whisper stopped. The sphere felt cold to the touch, unnaturally so, as if it were a hole in the universe's warmth. As my gauntlet closed around it, a silent alarm must have tripped, a final failsafe I hadn't anticipated. The lab doors slammed shut, and the room was flooded with red light. A synthesized voice, calm and polite, echoed from the walls. Unscheduled biosignature detected in a sterile zone. Final sterilization protocol initiated. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I shoved the obsidian core into a shielded case and blasted my way out. Not through the door, but through the weaker observation window looking into the main corridor. The security drones, dormant for 200 years, came to life. They were clunky, old models, but their weapons were still functional. Plasma bolts sizzled past my head, scoring black streaks on the walls. I didn't run and gun. I ran and thought, using the station's own decay against it. I shot a weakened support strut, bringing a section of the ceiling down on one drone. I lured another into a corridor where the external hull had been breached, and the explosive decompression tore it apart. It was a desperate, ugly fight, and by the time I made it back to the Magpie, my suit was scorched and my arm was bleeding from a piece of shrapnel. I hadn't just retrieved an object, I had survived, and in doing so, I had killed. The line had been crossed. The flight back was silent. I didn't feel triumph, only a cold, hollow certainty. I transmitted the confirmation code to the archivist. The Ouroboros symbol reappeared on my screen. The past is paid for. The future is yours to unmake. The data transfer began. It wasn't a dossier or a technical manual. It was a name and a location. Dr. Aris Volkov, head of the Concordate's Special Projects Division for Advanced Theoretical Physics, and his project codename Lazarus. The official brief described it as research into null space harmonics and reality fabrication. The unofficial, heavily encrypted notes I was given described its true purpose: the creation of a weapon that could erase matter and energy from a targeted coordinate without leaving a trace. Is a surgical solution for intractable political problems. Maya's death had been a field test on a civilian target to gauge the weapon's efficacy and the Concordate's ability to control the narrative. The final file was a location. The Lazarus Project was not based in some high-tech lab in the core worlds. It was hidden on a remote, tidally locked moon named Erebus, orbiting a gas giant in the unsettled expanse, a place officially listed as uninhabitable and quarantined due to lethal atmospheric conditions. It was a lie to keep people away. I stared at the name. Aris Volkov. It wasn't the name of a monster. It was the name of a man who had signed my daughter's death warrant. I laid a course for Erebus. The boneyard, my home for a decade, vanished behind me. I was no longer a scrapper, no longer a grieving father, lost in memories. I was the debt collector. I was the unforeseen variable, and I was coming to balance the equation. The name Aris Volkov was a shard of ice in my gut, a fixed point in a universe that had become a chaotic swirl of grief and fury. Erebus was the destination, but the path to it was a blade's edge. The unsettled expanse was not Concordate territory. It was a patchwork of petty warlords, pirate havens, and corporate black sites, all held together by a fragile web of paranoia and greed. A direct approach was suicide. The Lazarus Project would be protected not by a fleet, but by obscurity and a lethal automated defense system. To get past the myth of an uninhabitable moon, I needed more than just coordinates. I needed the keys to the backdoor patrol schedules, sensor blind spots, and the specific frequency modulations of the security transponders. Information that wasn't for sale, but could be earned. My search led me to the Sump, a hollowed-out asteroid that had once been a refinery for a long-bankrupt mining corporation. Now, it was a notorious free port, a festering hub of smugglers, mercenaries, and info brokers, all orbiting a dying star in a system with no name. The Sump's interior was a labyrinth of rust-streaked catwalks and pressurized modules, lit by the harsh glare of jury-rigged floodlights and the flickering neon of bars and chop shops. The air tasted of ozone, unrecycled sweat, and desperation. It was a place where a man's life was worth less than the fuel in his ship. Here, information was the only true currency, and its queen was a woman named Cora. Cora's office was a cramped, soundproofed cube overlooking the main docking bay, its windows polarized to a deep, impenetrable black. She was a thin, severe woman with cybernetically augmented eyes that glowed with a faint silver light, constantly scanning, analyzing. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. I laid out my request, all available data on concordant black sites in the unsettled expanse, specifically anything related to a moon named Erebus. Her silver eyes narrowed. Erebus is a ghost story, Angie said, her voice a dry rasp. A place ships go to die. The data you're asking for isn't on a server somewhere. It's in the whispers between concordant patrol captains, in the fragmented logs of ships that got too close and were warned away by things that weren't supposed to be there. Compiling it is dangerous, expensive. I'll pay, I said. She laughed, a short, sharp sound like breaking glass. Your kind of desperation doesn't have a credit balance. You have nothing I want, Scrapper, except, perhaps, your skill set." She gestured to a flickering monitor, which showed a heavily armed freighter, its hull painted with the gaudy insignia of a local pirate kingpin named Vask. Vask has been encroaching on my territory. He thinks his ship, the Goliath, makes him untouchable. He's moving a shipment of refined Neptunium isotopes tomorrow night. I don't want the isotopes. I want them to disappear. I want him to understand the cost of doing business in my space, disable his ship, take his cargo, and dump it into the local star. Do that, and the whispers about Erebus are yours." It was another audition, like the one for the archivist, but this one required a different kind of performance. This wasn't about surviving a tomb. It was about creating one. I agreed without hesitation. The man who had once mourned the dead was now being paid to make them. I found the Goliath just where Cora said it would be, lumbering through a dense asteroid field, its running lights arrogantly bright. It was a bruiser, a repurposed ore hauler with more guns than sense. But it was slow, and its sensor array was designed to detect capital ships, not a cold-running ghost like the Magpie. The man who had once found solace in silence now used it as a weapon. I drifted through the field, a shadow among stones, my ship's heat signature bleeding into the background radiation. I didn't open with a hail. I didn't fire a warning shot. My first volley from the kinetic cannons was a precise, surgical strike, not at the bridge, not at the weapons, but at the engine block. The solid slugs, dense and unpowered until the moment of impact, tore through the Goliath's unshielded stern, crippling its primary drive in a silent flash of vaporized metal. The ship lurched, suddenly dead in the water. Alarms blared across the comm channels, a symphony of panic and confusion. Before they could bring their turrets to bear on my position, I was already moving, using the asteroids as cover. My second volley slicing through the articulation joint of their primary dorsal cannon. It sagged. Useless. This wasn't a battle. It was a dissection. I was taking the ship apart, piece by piece, with the cold efficiency of a scrapper breaking down a hulk. I latched onto the portside cargo bay. The plasma torch that had once been my livelihood, now a tool for a home invasion. The moment I breached the hull, I was met with a storm of pulse fire. Vask's crew were thugs, not soldiers. They fired wildly, their panic making them sloppy. I moved low and fast, the confines of the ship's corridor familiar territory. I shot 2 of them before they even saw me. My aim steady, my heart a cold, rhythmic drum. There was no rage in the act, no satisfaction. It was just work. I was a variable in their equation, and my function was to bring their sum to 0. I found Vask on his bridge, a large, blustering man whose face was a mask of disbelief and fury. He lunged at me with a vibro knife. I sidestepped, brought the butt of my rifle up under his chin, and the fight was over. He crumpled to the deck, unconscious. I left him and his surviving crew alive, locked in their own mess hall. My message wasn't for them. I located the Neptunium isotopes, loaded the container onto the Magpie, and sealed the Goliath's cargo bay from the outside. My last act was to use my torch to carve a single, deep scar into the ship's bridge window, right in front of the captain's chair, a permanent reminder. Then I flew the isotopes into the corona of the system star and watched them burn. A brief, brilliant flare that was visible for millions of miles. A silent testament to Cora's reach and my own transformation. When I returned to the sump, Cora was waiting. She transferred the data without a word, her silver eyes holding a new, unsettling glint of something that might have been respect, or perhaps fear. The data was a treasure trove of ghosts. It contained fragmentary concordant patrol logs, black box recordings from missing scout ships, and seismic survey data that had been classified and buried for decades. Pieced together, it painted a terrifying picture. Erebus was a fortress, buried a kilometer beneath the moon's surface on the Terminator, the twilight zone between the perpetually sun-scorched day side and the eternally frozen night side. Its only entrance was a heavily shielded thermal exhaust port, disguised as a natural volcanic vent. The data gave me the vent's cycle timings and the precise transponder codes that would mark me as Geological Survey Drone 734, a designation that would allow me to approach without being instantly vaporized by the automated defenses. My path was clear. I left the sump without looking back. The station and its denizens already a part of a life I was shedding like a dead skin. The Magpie, scarred from the encounter with the drones on Epsilon, and now again from stray shots from the Goliath, felt less like a ship and more like a vessel for my vengeance. Its groans and shudders, the echoes of my own breaking soul. As I jumped to the outer coordinates of the Erebus system, the silence returned, deeper and more profound than ever. It was the silence of the abyss, the absolute quiet before a final, terrible act. Before me, the gas giant loomed, a swirling behemoth of poison gas and crushing gravity, and there, beside it, was Erebus, a scarred, two-toned marble of a moon. One half was a blistering, cracked desert under the relentless glare of its primary. The other was a landscape of black, jagged ice, locked in a cold older than memory. And between them, a thin, gray line of perpetual twilight. My destination. The tomb where Dr. Aris Volkov played God, and the place where I would teach him that all gods must, eventually, face a reckoning. I was no longer a father. I was no longer a scrapper. I was the ghost of Drone 734, and I was going home. Erebus was a world of absolutes. The dayside was a furnace, a cracked and blistering hellscape where the very rocks seemed to boil under the relentless glare of the system's primary star. The night side was a cryogenic nightmare, a realm of black ice and frozen methane, where the temperature hovered just above absolute zero. Between these two infinites of fire and frost lay the Terminator, a sliver of perpetual twilight, a wound of gray dust and jagged canyons where the moon's agony was on constant display. This was my destination. This was the home of the Lazarus Project. I bled the last of the Magpie's heat into the void and began my approach. A cold shadow falling towards a world of ghosts. My transponder chirped, broadcasting its lie, Geological Survey Drone 734. For a heart-stopping minute, there was only silence. I was a breath held in the throat of the system. Then, a green light flickered on my console. The lie had been accepted. I was inside the first layer of the fortress. The moon's automated defenses, vast energy cannons and kinetic launchers powerful enough to gut a battleship, saw me as nothing more than a mindless piece of scientific equipment. I was invisible in plain sight. The volcanic vent Cora's data had identified was a gaping maw in the floor of a deep canyon, a dark pit that periodically exhaled a plume of superheated gas. The timings were precise. I had a window of exactly 74 seconds between the end of one cycle and the beginning of the next. I positioned the Magpie at the lip of the vent, the ship's hull groaning under the gravitational stress. As the last of the incandescent gas billowed out into the thin atmosphere, I pushed the throttle forward and plunged into the darkness. The descent was a controlled fall through hell. The tunnel was narrower than the schematics had suggested, its walls jagged with crystalline formations that scraped against the Magpie's hull like claws. The ship screamed in protest, alarms flashing across my console as I wrestled with the controls, navigating the tight turns of the lava tube. The heat from the rock walls was immense, pushing my new cooling systems to their absolute limit. 74 seconds felt like an eternity. Just as a low rumble from deep below signaled the start of the next cycle, I saw a perfectly circular opening in the side of the tunnel, the maintenance bay from Cora's data. I slammed the lateral thrusters, forcing the ship into a sideways skid, and crashed through the opening just as the vent behind me erupted in a torrent of white-hot plasma. I was in. The bay was clearly old, a staging area for the original construction of the base, long since abandoned. I powered down the Magpie, the silence that followed the engine's shutdown feeling absolute and profound. My work as a pilot was done. Now, the scrapper, the infiltrator, had to finish the job. I suited up, grabbing my pulse rifle and a set of breaching charges. I was a singular, alien presence in a sterile, self-contained world. The base was nothing like the decaying ruin of Station Epsilon. Here, everything was clean, functionally done and humming with a quiet, confident power. White corridors stretched into the distance, their floors so clean they reflected the cold. Recessed lighting. There were no guards, only the ever-present hum of the automated systems. Security was a web of energy grids, pressure sensors, and motion-activated turrets, all seamlessly integrated into the structure of the facility. But a system, no matter how complex, is still a machine. And I knew how machines thought. I moved through the service conduits that ran beneath the main corridors, a ghost in the facility's crawl space. I bypassed sensor relays, rerouted power from turret substations, and used my datapad to create looping ghost signals that drew the attention of the security AI to empty sectors. Each step was a calculated risk, a quiet conversation with the station's nervous system. It was the most intricate and dangerous salvage job of my life. Only this time, I wasn't stripping a Hulk for parts. I was stripping a fortress of its defenses, layer by layer, as I descended deeper towards its black heart. The data from Cora had led me to the main laboratory nexus, but the final door was a new kind of obstacle. It wasn't locked. It was sealed with a quantum-entangled cryptographic key. There was no bypassing it. It had to be opened from the inside. But next to it, I found what I was looking for, a shielded conduit carrying the facility's raw data outflow. I attached a physical tap, a dangerous and crude method that would trigger alarms within minutes. But I only needed seconds. I wasn't trying to steal the data. I was just listening to the whispers. The information that flooded my datapad was a nightmare of scientific jargon and cold, clinical reports. I saw test logs, simulations, dozens of them. They hadn't just tested the Lazarus weapon on the Equinox. There had been other tests on uninhabited moons, on captured pirate vessels, and my blood ran cold, on a small and independent mining colony in the Asteria Belt, a colony that had officially been reported as destroyed by a freak solar flare. Another accident. Another 800 souls erased from existence and swept under the rug. Maya wasn't the first. She was just the latest. Then I found it. A live feed schematic of the main laboratory. In the center of a vast circular chamber, suspended in a web of containment fields, was the weapon itself. And it wasn't a cannon or a missile. It was a perfect sphere of absolute blackness. A hole in the universe the size of my fist. A point of non-existence that was actively unmaking the light and energy that touched it. And standing before it, observing a bank of monitors, was a single figure. Thin, graying hair, a crisp white lab coat. Dr. Aris Volkov. I didn't need the door anymore. The conduit I was in fed directly into a maintenance junction right above the laboratory chamber. I planted a breaching charge, set it for a low-yield directional blast, and blew a hole in the floor of the conduit. I dropped into the lab, landing in a crouch on a high gantry, my rifle already raised. The sound of my arrival echoed in the cavernous room. Volkov didn't startle. He didn't even turn around at first. He simply sighed, a sound of profound weariness, and slowly rotated in his chair. He was older than in his file photo, his face deeply lined, his eyes holding not the malice of a monster, but the hollowed-out exhaustion of a man who had stared into the abyss for too long. "I suppose it was only a matter of time," he said, his voice calm, resigned. "You must be one of the relatives. From the equinox." My finger tightened on the trigger. All the pain, the rage, the cold fury of the past months coalesced into this one single moment. "You murdered 3 Verforce 12 people," I said, my voice a low growl. "You murdered my daughter." "Murder is such an imprecise word for what we do here," he said, looking past me, up at the sphere of nothingness that pulsed gently in its containment field. "We don't kill, we displace." "Stop talking in riddles," I snarled, taking a step forward. "You erased them." "No," Volkov said, turning his gaze to meet mine. His eyes were disturbingly clear. "Not erased, moved. That sphere is not a weapon. Not really. It's a gateway, a door to a place where the laws of our universe no longer apply. A state of pure, unpatterned existence. We call it null space." I froze, the words hitting me with the force of a physical blow. A gateway. My mind flashed back to the commander's last words on the equinox. It's unmaking things. He had been wrong. It was remaking them. "The test on the equinox wasn't about destruction," Volkov continued, a flicker of something, was it excitement, regret in his eyes. "It was about observation. We needed to see if a complex system, a ship filled with living beings, could be transferred through the gateway intact. And it could." The rifle in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The simple, clean line of my vengeance, the straight path from my grief to this man's death, had just twisted into a horrifying, complex knot. "What are you saying?" I whispered, the words barely audible. Volkov stood up, his gaze fixed on me, a scientist observing a new, fascinating variable. "I am saying that your daughter is not dead," he said. Each word a carefully placed stone that shattered the foundation of my world. "She's on the other side, trapped, perhaps, changed, most certainly, but she is not gone. She is simply elsewhere." The word "elsewhere" hung in the sterile air of the laboratory, a concept so vast and terrifying it threatened to collapse the very foundations of my rage. For months, I had been a man with a simple, brutal purpose to find the end of a chain and to destroy it. Now, the final link had told me the chain wasn't a line, but a circle, leading to a place I couldn't comprehend. My rifle, which had felt like a natural extension of my arm, was now a useless piece of metal. You can't shoot a theory. You can't execute a ghost. Proof, I finally managed to say, my voice a ragged whisper. Show me. Volkov nodded as if expecting the demand. He didn't reach for a weapon, but for a small, isolated console. The gateway doesn't just displace matter, he explained, his fingers dancing across the interface. It leaves an echo, a quantum resonance, faint, almost undetectable, but it's there. We can't see into null space, but we can listen to the wall that separates our realities, and sometimes something whispers back. He brought up a visualizer on the main screen. It was a chaotic storm of static, a representation of the background radiation of the universe. Then, he filtered it. The static coalesced into a single, faint, pulsing waveform. It was impossibly slow, like the heartbeat of a sleeping leviathan. Within the wave, buried deep in the noise, was a pattern, a repeating, non-random sequence. It's a signal. I breathed. Of a sort. Volkov corrected. Not radio. Not light. It's a rhythmic disturbance in the fabric of causality itself. We've been receiving it since the Equinox test. It's structured. Intelligent. It's the echo of 3,412 minds trying to make sense of a reality without rules. They're not dead. They're thinking. The rage in my chest didn't vanish. It transmuted, cooling from a white-hot fire into a diamond-hard point of impossible, agonizing hope. Hope was a far more dangerous fuel than anger. Anger was simple. Hope demanded the impossible. Can you bring them back for the first time? A shadow of uncertainty crossed Volkov's face. Theoretically, reversing the polarity of the displacement field is problematic. The energy required would be catastrophic. It would consume the moon's entire power core in a single, uncontrolled surge. The gateway was designed as a one-way door. Opening it from this side is easy. Prying it open from the outside to pull something back. It might tear this entire facility apart. It might tear the fabric of space itself. He looked at me, his scientist's gaze replaced by something ancient and weary. And what comes back might not be what you remember. Null space is not kind to patterns. It erodes them. Memories. Personality. The very shape of a person. It could all be stripped away. A klaxon began to blare. A shrill, insistent shriek that shattered the quiet hum of the lab. Red lights flashed across the white walls, painting the room in the color of blood. On a secondary monitor, a message appeared in stark block letters. External security breach. Concordate fleet. Sector approach. ETA 18 minutes. My data tap. They had traced it. The Sentinels were coming to bury their secret for good. And me with it. 18 minutes. That was all the time my vengeance had bought me. They can't get this, I said, nodding towards the pulsing black sphere. They can't be allowed to keep using it. I agree, Volkov said, a surprising fire in his tired eyes. They took my research, my life's work, and turned it into a tool for sanitation, a way to sweep their problems into a closet of non-existence. They have no idea what they've truly found. He looked from the warning on the screen to the gateway, and then to me. You are the variable I failed to account for, the one piece of the equation that acted with emotion instead of logic. Perhaps you are the key. A desperate, insane plan began to form. We didn't have time to run. We didn't have time to hide. We only had time for one final, impossible act. You said it would take the entire core, I said, my scrapper's mind seeing the connections, the power conduits, the flow of energy. The Magpie. Her reactor core is a salvaged military-grade unit. It's unstable, but it can be overloaded to produce a massive, short-term energy spike. If I can bypass the safety protocols and shunt it directly into your containment field. Volkov's eyes widened. It would be an uncontrolled energy cascade, but it might work. It might provide the brute force needed to momentarily reverse the gateway's polarity, but you would have to anchor the retrieval. The field will need a template, a complex biological pattern from this reality to lock onto, a reference point to pull a corresponding pattern from the other side. The meaning was clear. It had to be me. Tell me what to do, I said. The next 15 minutes were a blur of frantic, focused activity. We were no longer enemies. We were two men bound by a shared, desperate purpose. Volkov worked the console, writing new algorithms on the fly, preparing the gateway for a command it was never designed to receive. I sprinted back to the Magpie, tearing open the reactor housing, my hands moving with a speed and certainty born of a decade spent living inside the guts of machines. I rerouted the primary energy conduits, bypassing every safety regulator and governor, transforming my ship's heart into a crude, powerful bomb. I connected its output to the laboratory's main power coupling, a direct, raw feed of pure energy. As I worked, the ship's comms crackled to life. It was a broadcast, a fleet-wide concordant channel, unidentified vessel, and unauthorized personnel at Site Erebus. A cold, official voice announced, "Surrender, and you will be granted leniency. Fail to comply, and we will sterilize the facility from orbit." Leniency. The same lie they had offered the universe about the equinox. I finished my work and ran back to the lab. Volkov had prepped a harness next to the main console, a web of cables and biometric sensors. "It's ready," he said, his face pale with sweat. "Once you're connected, the energy from your ship will be routed through you to the gateway. Your neural and biological signatures will be the template. You have to focus. Think of your daughter. Not her face. Not her voice. Think of her pattern. The unique, indelible mark she left on your life. That is the only thing the gateway will understand." I strapped myself into the harness. Outside, I could hear the faint, deep thrum of weapons fire as the moon's automated defenses engaged the approaching fleet. Volkov was buying us our last few seconds. I looked at the black sphere, the hole in my world, and closed my eyes. I pushed past the grief, the rage, the memory of her laughter. I focused on the feeling of her hand in mine as a child, the specific weight of it, the warmth, the fundamental, undeniable truth of her existence. Now Volkov yelled and slammed his hand down on the console. The world dissolved. It wasn't pain. Pain would have been a mercy. It was an absolute and total sensory overload. The energy of a dying star surged through my body. I felt my own pattern, my very sense of self, being stretched thin, pulled apart atom by atom. I saw the chaotic, formless ocean of null space, not with my eyes, but with my soul. I felt the 3-4-12 minds adrift in it. A chorus of silent, confused consciousness. I screamed for Maya, not with my voice, but with the raw energy of my being. And in that endless storm, I felt a flicker, a response, a pattern that recognized my own. I latched onto it with every ounce of my will, the father in me reaching across the void. The laboratory screamed around me. Metal twisted. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks. The black sphere wavered, no longer a perfect void, but a shimmering, unstable vortex. From its center, something began to coalesce, not a person, but light, a form of pure, white light that slowly, agonizingly, took on a human shape. She looked at me. Her eyes held the light of distant, alien stars. She was my Maya. But she was also something more, something ancient. She'd lived a lifetime in the moments between her last breath on the equinox and this one. She didn't speak. She just raised a hand. The facility was coming apart at the seams. "Go," Volkov yelled over the din, standing his ground at the console, a captain going down with his ship. "The gateway is collapsing. It will take the whole moon with it." I ripped myself from the harness, my body screaming in protest. I grabbed Maya's hand. It felt real, solid, warm, and pulled her towards the maintenance bay. We scrambled into the Magpie, just as the tunnel behind us imploded in a flash of pure energy. I slammed the airlock shut, fired the thrusters, and piloted my broken, dying ship up the throat of the volcano, outracing the shockwave of a world unmaking itself. From the silent safety of the void, we watched Erebus die. The moon fractured, cracked, and then collapsed in on itself, consumed by the final, violent death of the Lazarus Gateway. The Concordate fleet, caught in the blast, was either vaporized or thrown tumbling into the gas giant, Volkov, his project, and the Concordate's darkest secret were all gone, erased in a final, fitting act of cosmic justice. The silence returned. I turned from the viewport and looked at my daughter. She stood in the middle of the cockpit, watching me, her expression unreadable. The rage was gone. The grief was gone. The long, lonely years of salvage and silence were over. But my old life hadn't returned. I had my daughter back. But I didn't know who she was anymore. And she didn't know the man of rage and ruin I had become to find her. We were strangers. Survivors of a war no one else would ever know was fought. I had collected my debt, but the price had been everything. And in the quiet of the cockpit, in the vast, empty space between two broken people, a new and far more complicated silence began.